take your country back because it's been stolen. The hijacking, this was an alleged 4 airplanes. It was the hijacking was our Constitution and our identity as Americans. That's what was hijacked.
Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. Joining me today is a very special guest, and that is the President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, David R. Meiswinkle, Esquire. Now, David is a retired New Brunswick police officer and a United States Army veteran, as well as a criminal defense attorney, and he's here today to discuss, really, to just kind of put in a nutshell, the continuing cover-up of 9/11 truth and all the important things therein that you need to know about that the mainstream media and everybody else around it will absolutely keep from your view. Now, 2 years ago, this past April 10th, 2018, the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry submitted a grand jury petition to the United States Attorney's Office in the Southern District located in New York City. Now, many of you on this channel may have already seen some of this information. We talked about it, actually specifically talked about David himself on a briefing they gave around the Alaska study, all the information around Building 7, and how it's pretty clear that we can see evidence now that shows that this was controlled demolition. And this is stuff that's being, at the point, it seemed like it was going to be introduced into the grand jury. And today it seems now they are, again, trying to suppress that truth. So let's start off today, David, with where the information that brought you to this grand jury. For those that may not know, the Alaska study and the information around it that's so incredibly important to know about, and what you thought was going to happen with this, and now what they're ultimately doing today or recently that's kind of dragging their feet on this once again.
What we did is you can access us through lc4for911.org, and you can actually see the grand jury petition there and the numerous exhibits. There's 57 exhibits there, and we like to say they're dispositive of controlled demolition, which means that in order to do a controlled demolition, it takes weeks, if not months. Controlled demolitions involve explosives and incendiaries. And that is what contributed, in our estimation, to what brought the towers down. Now, in the history of this country, to our knowledge, there's never been a grand jury to look into this evidence. And we're presenting this evidence, and we're asking the U.S. Attorney back in April 10th. We went to in New York, in the Southern District area, and we gave it to them, the petition with the exhibits, and we waited for a response. And we were surprised. In November 7th, of 2018, we did get a response from the U.S. Attorney there, Berman, and his assistant, who was head of terrorism, Mike Ferreira. And they said that they had read and reviewed the petition and would comply with the statute, which is 18 U.S.C. 3332A, which mandates, and we look at it as an obligation, it's not discretionary, mandatory, to present the evidence we have to a grand jury. And we waited. And then last summer, Mick Harrison, our litigation director, and myself called them, and we talked to Mr. Ferreira. We asked him, can you give us basically a wink and a nod that you're doing something, you're acting in good faith? And he said, no, it's all secret. Now, it's not all secret in that way. There are things that are secret and should be, but there are what they call ministerial records, some kind of indication that there's some movement there. That's what we wanted. And we told them at the time, and previously, we had told them we'd come in and help make presentations. We know the key people maybe you'd want to ask as far as the architects and engineers and things of that nature. And here in all these exhibits are indications of the explosive evidence that we're talking about. So he said, again, he couldn't do that. So we told him we would have to probably sue him under a mandamus. Now, mandamus' action is basically what it is asking the judge to tell them to do their duty, to do their job. We're not asking for damages. We just want this thing to move forward. And we want the U.S. Attorney to do what he's supposed to do, and that's present the evidence that's never been seen by the public. Now, what's this evidence? We say it's explosive evidence. It's evidence of one of the testimonies. There's 121 firemen that apparently heard or saw explosions in the building on that day. And that was retrieved, fortunately, from a Freedom of Information Act that the New York Times did a good thing. They sued to get that information, many pages, and a author, a doctor of religion up in New York, up in Canada, actually, Graham McQueen, he read everything, compiled it, and had real strict parameters as to what was an explosion or a bomb and things of that nature. And he erred on the conservative side, so there's probably more than that. But he came up with 121 of their statements, and we take those statements and we have them as one exhibit, just one exhibit. We have exhibits there of different testimonies. We have exhibits of scientific studies. Nels Herritz and Stephen Jones did a very well-known study for those who are in the area of the red-gray chips, which indicate a nanothermite high-grade military explosive in the buildings. So, or in the dust samples. On 4 different dust samples they tested, and millions and millions of iron microspheres, which is a remnant of indication the nanothermite is there. It's one of the signatures. So that's a part of the exhibits there. There's seismic reports from a Dr. Rousseau, who was a doctor from in France, who studied the seismology of the incident, and he took these records. They came out actually Columbia University, I believe, from their people, and he did his report and said that the explosions in the tower happened right before a plane impact. They happened before the impact of the plane, a few seconds before. And when the buildings came down, there was explosions right before the buildings came down. So that's pretty important too. That's another indication that people have not seen that or heard that. You have seismic reports that indicate there was explosions in the basement prior to the plane hitting. Plus you have testimony from people like Willie Rodriguez, who was in charge. He was like the maintenance man in the North Tower, a very heroic man, saved many people because he had the master keys, helped the firemen get people out of there. And in fact was the last person to get out of there alive. He had to dive under a fire engine, and he was buried for, I think, about 2 hours so they could get him out. And he heard, he was in his office on the 2nd basement tier, I think. There's 6 basements there, 6 levels below. And there was a big explosion. A guy comes from down below up to his room, up his office. His skin is coming off his face and off his arms. Willie gets him out of the building. And Willie, along with all the people down there, know there was explosions before the plane hit. Willie made testimony to the 9/11 Commission at that time, between 2002, 2004, when they taken testimony. His statements were blacked out. All right, no one knows what was made public, as others were. Sybil Edmonds was a person that her statements were blacked out. Norman Mineta, transportation department head, his statements were blacked out. So, and the firemen were never called. You have 120 firemen, in total 155 first responders, including police officers and EMT people. They should have been talked to.
Yeah, you would think they would be the first people that would be that they have the firsthand experience. Let me ask you a question on that. We're talking about the introduction of evidence in regard to a grand jury, rather just evidence being discovered around a very contentious topic. Now, how unusual is that for any process of our justice system to drag its feet or intentionally stop the introduction of clearly relevant evidence that comes from a lot of actual mainstream sources? How unusual is that for people that don't realize what this is?
I think what's unusual is the whole situation. On 9/11, there is nothing normal in a way of, as far as protocol it's followed. It's a slippery slope wherever you put your foot in your hand if you're climbing it, and you're bound to just slip and slide down. There is nothing normal. The normal grand jury investigation, to our knowledge, was never conducted. Just starting off with the forensic evidence at ground zero, which would indicate a lot with regards to the steel. To our knowledge, that wasn't preserved, it wasn't photographed, it wasn't studied, it wasn't analyzed. If you have pitted metal, if you have cuts in certain ways, if you have contortions in the metal, it takes a certain temperature. A lot of people don't realize that the official story, and what you have to do, Ryan, is people should go and watch the videos again. You can still get them up on YouTube of the North Tower collapsing, of the South Tower collapsing, of the Building 7 collapsing. And when you see those collapses, realize that I like to say, you're seeing what is miraculous in the sense of what the official story is. Because when you look at Building 7, recalling it hasn't been hit by an airplane, it stands 47 stories, 610 feet. At that time, it would be the biggest building in 33 states. It would be, but for 9/11, it would be the story around the world. This skyscraper with small office fires in it collapsed. How could it happen? How could it happen? There's no jet fuel there. Now, office fires, to my knowledge, burn hottest, usually about 400 or 500 degrees Fahrenheit. If you add the airplane fuel, it's about 1750, the hottest they'll get. If you want to melt steel, you've got to need 2800 degrees Fahrenheit. So how can an office fire in New York City, in Building 7, that's burning maybe 400 or 500 degrees Fahrenheit, collapse like that? How can the steel be melted or bowed out of shape so much that the hinges unseat themselves? And you need at least to melt it 2800 degrees to bring that down. Now, it comes down at free fall. Now, what that means is if you are Richard Gage, Architects and Engineers President, likes to say, took a bowling ball and dropped it off a building, that's free fall. If you think of if you ever did any judo or something and somebody does a foot sweep and you come down, that's free fall. There's nothing under you. Now, what free fall means, there is nothing under you. Now, under this building, in Building 7, there's 47 stories, 610 feet. And for that to come down at free fall, the only way it could come down is if there's nothing under it. So it means it has to be, just by common sense, be taken out through explosions. The only way we know of some sort of explosion, some sort of device, some sort of controlled demolition, which would remove all the supports at the same time, simultaneously at the same time, so it comes down in its own footprint, which Building 7 does. Now, the other two towers, which are bigger, North Tower, the South Tower, they come down at near free fall. There, though, there's a different phenomena there, though. If you watch it, there's a horizontal blowing out of these girders, which weigh many tons. We're talking about thousands of pounds of iron being sent out horizontally. If it was a free fall, it would go vertically. It would just fall down. It wouldn't be spewing out 600 feet to the left and right, impaling in other buildings like a cannonball. All right. So you don't even have to be a scientist to start to look at the common sense of how can this building go down that fast. People say pancaking, but it's not pancaking. Pancaking would be one floor, hits another floor, hits another floor, hits another floor, another floor, another floor. And you're talking about 100 and some floors like that going down. Take a couple minutes, right? Take a slow process. We're talking about foot sweep. You're down.
That's what I found so interesting about the Alaska study is that really, and again, really for people to take away, like you said, you don't need a science degree in this is basic self-evident information that a building, and when you actually look into this study, that it really makes a point to show how many, I forget how many the number is, but how many different simulations they did that showed that even a small variation would have made it tip in one way or the other. And this came so straight down that it had to be simultaneous explosions, which wouldn't have been possible with what we saw. So can you elaborate on what that went into for everybody and the study and how that relates to what we're talking about?
No, that study is recent, and architects and engineers put a lot of time and energy into making that happen, and they should be commended. In fact, they should be commended for all the evidence and time that they've helped us gather. The Lawyers Committee, basically, we do some of our own research, but for this, it was already there. I mean, a lot of it. So we gathered evidence that was already available, and we put it in a form that you could present to a grand jury. But certainly, Professor Halsey's report will be part of our grant. In fact, we even sent the tentative report to the U.S. Attorney. They have that report, not the final one. I have to see how much a difference. But there was a tentative one that was put out like a few months back. We sent that to the U.S. Attorney, but we'll send the more perfected one also there, because that's evidence that a professional did. And what we're trying to do is to get people to want to reopen this, or open it maybe for the first time. You have to realize the people that will be sitting in the grand jury, most of them probably are not familiar with any of this. And it goes back to the media to begin with. If the first day when the original reaction, even Dan Rather, was this looks like a controlled demolition, like we've seen many times. And that's what people were saying initially, until the, I'm gonna say the fix, but the official story came in, right? So the official story comes in and everybody is good troopers and wants to march to the official story. It's like the emperor has no clothes, but of course he has the nicest clothes around because everybody's wants to be sycophants and pretend that, he's fully clothed. But if you look at the real truth here and strip it naked, you'll see that there's been great treachery at the highest level involved in these crimes. These are crimes that have never been addressed, just like many others prior to this. And we're at a junction now in history. We mentioned this briefly, historical context, but we're at a junction in history that we have to retrench, rewind here. We have to go back to a time prior to 9/11 when the Constitution still meant something. You still had your freedoms. But since 9/11, one of the results of it is that you have a draconian state where 24/7, and this comes from people like Bill Binney, who's a friend of ours with the Lawyers Committee. And we've talked to Bill and Kurt Wiebe and others, whistleblowers and NSA, that our American rights as far as the First and Fourth Amendment have been suspended and are being violated every day, 24/7, where we are being gathered, our information, whether it be our cell phones, our emails, our text messages, our web searches, all of that, unconstitutional, illegal. And we have allowing that, our government, and actually engaging with these other companies to do it, to commit crimes.
And we're seeing the same thing today, actually, just as a point of reference for everybody. It's happening again right now under the new, some new version of fear.
Well, it's 100. It hasn't stopped. But what the point is that it opened the door. But for 9/11, had they done their job that day, you wouldn't be worrying about getting taken down. People wouldn't be worried about being censored with regards to YouTube and other platforms out there. They just, it's terrible. It's it's more than autocratic. It's a dictatorial as far as the free speech, etc. Now, as Americans, we have an advantage that maybe a lot of people don't have, but we don't appreciate, don't understand it. We haven't been schooled in it. We don't think about it. We're not taught about it. We don't reflect on it. We have a Constitution with a Bill of Rights, was set up by people that risked their life against tyranny, and we've invited tyranny into our bedroom, into our places of worship. We've allowed this tyranny to run us, and it has to be reversed. If it's not, we'll all be, what can I say, lobotomized or something in some way down a road, and not even knowing you are. In other words, the future generations will. We still have a spark because we know and we saw what it was prior. It's always an advantage to say, hey, this is the way it was, this is the way it is. People are being born into this situation now. They don't know what it was. They only know what it is. And everything here is based on sensualism, entertainment, having fun. There's no deep thinking about it. There's no profoundness. There's no, what's your purpose in life? There's no real quiz about it. Just make money and have a good time and shut up, join in, and, so this is what we get for it.
It's the bread and circuses of today. I mean, that's what we're staring at, and it's just they're trying to give us things. I mean, it's what I look at as the $1,000 checks they're trying to dangle in front of people right now. It's just something to keep them waiting for something as opposed to dealing with what's happening in front of them.
Right. Now, with reference to this grand jury petition, why it's so important. Now, we want to do investigations not only in New York City, and we want to do them in reference to the anthrax attacks in 2001, which is quite synchronistic to perhaps to what we're experiencing today. We don't know that. We haven't got into it, but we have a committee. We've met. We've had some important people present to us, and we will continue that. We would like to have a grand jury petition this year sometime in that area, the anthrax, if things we can work it out.
And for those listening, David and I have already spoke about setting up possible interviews about that. Since Whitney Webb's research is on that topic has been huge, I recommend everybody check out that work, A Dark Winter and the Engineering Contagion series. But please continue. I just want everyone to know that there's more coming.
I find her work very fascinating too, and some of the same characters involved in both the Crimson Contagion or whatever and the Dark Winter. But and still vibrant today they are, and because it's never was properly addressed, I think. But anyway, the Anthrax Committee, we have setting up a committee on government obstruction and misconduct, which is kind of fascinating because everywhere you look, there's government misconduct and obstruction. It becomes the norm. All right, and then we have the Shanksville Committee, and we'll have the Pentagon. The Pentagon is the most controversial. We're going to keep that on the back burner now. But those are some committees that we want to do and do grand jury petitions. Now, this is, I won't say it's a test case in New York, but we're going to do what all we can do to get in there. What's happening now is that they put a motion to dismiss our complaint based on standing. And we had a right to First Amendment to make our standing stronger if we wanted to. And we did. We have put, in addition, Bob McIlvaine, who lost his son in the North Tower. We put Commissioner Joya, who was a fire commissioner who worked the piles and lost friends there. And he actually qualifies for aid because he's down there. He's not sick now, but he has 2 friends that work there that have cancer. We have Fire Chief O'Kelly. He was a hazmat fire chief, retired. He has a lung problem, bronchial problem related to 9/11. He gets assistance. We have Diana Hetzel. She lost her husband. He was a firefighter in one of the towers. And we have Jeannie Evans. She lost her brother. He was a firefighter, both New York City Fire Department in one of the towers. We have Richard Gage. He is the head of Architects and Engineers, and the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And so that's the plaintiffs lined up, and we're suing Berman and Barr. Now, there's a story on our website, lc4for911.org, with pictures of Barr and Berman there, the courthouse, and some of these co-plaintiffs that I just mentioned. So the update is now we have to respond to their recent briefs, and we have about, I think, a little more than a week to respond, and then they'll respond to that, and then eventually a judge will do something. And if we're not successful, then we'll appeal it, and we'll appeal it as far as we can if it means the Supreme Court. And what this is what the complaint was, is we're asking the judge, it's 2-part, and one is give us some indication that you're doing and acting in good faith, just anything. So that's what we're asking for. It's really under the common law. And if you can't do that, then we're asking the judge, order the U.S. attorney to do their job, or have the evidence presented to a grand jury. Now, this is going to be testing what a grand jury can do, and maybe a modern interpretation of a grand jury, because they used to have a lot more freedom until about 1945 or 46, when they changed the federal rules of criminal procedure, et cetera. They gave an inordinate amount of power to the prosecutor, the U.S. attorney, to direct what was known as the People's Court, basically, that we were going to be able to present. And the present is the word, is a key word in the Constitution, the Fifth Amendment. If you're going to bring up charges against somebody, you can do it through presentment or indictment, but you don't ever hear about presentment anymore. But it was never made illegal or unconstitutional. They just circumvented it with their statutes and laws, etc. So it may become, what does it mean for the people to be able to bring their crimes to the government? And it may be a government that's totally out of control, and it needs to be brought in. How do the people react to it without, of course, you don't want violence or anything like that. How do you do it legally? So we're trying to do it legally right now in New York City. And with people who lost their loved ones. They're the plaintiffs. For them to say they have no standing is like, think about that for a second. You can't bring crimes that you want investigated that have been researched. This isn't just people coming off the street. These are experts who have looked at this material and are telling you, look at it, consider it. You've never done it. And we're just asking the U.S. attorney, hey, show it to them. People have enough common sense. Show it to the people. That's all we're asking them.
It's right? Just staggering. It's staggering. I mean, we're talking about, you mentioned, and we're talking about experts, fire commissioners, people that were present, that were experienced these things. I mean, we're talking about a redress of grievances. This is a foundational concept in our country. And it's just, people out there need to really realize how upsetting this is, coming from a group that pretends to fight for these very people as they're suppressing the truth that they're trying to present about their own experiences. That's staggering.
And this is if there's a beauty in it, is that the lawyers committee and all of the American citizens have the fallback. And it's not a trite expression to say these are your constitutional rights. This is what makes you an American, friends. This is what makes us Americans. Other people don't have these constitutional rights. And we just put our hand up and say, stop, you can't do that. But what's happened is everyone's been co-opted. It seems like the law enforcement's been co-opted, the military's been co-opted, the judge has been co-opted. Not totally. Certainly the big business has been co-opted. And we have to deal with the banks. It's so much co-option. And we have to draw a line here and say, wait a second. And the old, again, it's not trite, take your country back because it's been stolen. It has been. And I would like to say that the hijacking just wasn't alleged 4 airplanes. It was the hijacking was our Constitution and our identity as Americans. That's what was hijacked. And we have to realize that. And the older people still have that sense, I think. I'm concerned that the young people don't realize the value of this gem, these diamonds that are glistening, that are your rights, that you haven't been really schooled in purposely. You haven't appreciated what you have. You will when you lose it, if you lose it. And that was what the big discussion with Benjamin Franklin in reference to freedom and security versus security. And basically he's saying that, if you can keep it, you have a democracy. If you can keep it. And what Jefferson's saying, you have to be educated. You have to be educated and vigilant. Educated and vigilant. So if we want to start to find out what it means to be an American, you might want to look at the American Revolution and the founding fathers and what they went through and why they created the laws at that time they did. They weren't perfect, but relative to the times, they were the best. And we have to upgrade ourselves relative to the times and make ourselves the best. And we can do that if we reclaim our heritage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You had mentioned something about hijacking your country. And this is interesting on one of the things that we were going to talk about, this concept, because what we're talking about right now is the idea that our own government is suppressing the actual evidence in regard to something that these people are invested in. But we're also seeing evidence of potentially other people involved, obviously. Now, one of these things that one of the investigations, or rather the lawsuits, the actions that you're working on, was the Oprah action, right, in New Jersey, in regard to the dancing Israelis, the high fivers, and the information therein. Now, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I find this to be a very contentious topic, but one that's very clearly, this is verified information. It's people that were involved with this that have ties back to foreign intelligence services. So please elaborate on that for me.
Well, I'll tie that in, if I could, with the federal lawsuit we have in Washington, D.C., because that ties in. And we have a lawsuit in D.C. that we have to appeal because it was thrown out for standing. And what that did was that back in 2014, the Congress mandated that the FBI was to assess all information that hadn't been considered originally by the 9/11 Commission between 2002 and 2004. And there was 7 areas that we knew that they hadn't done it. There was probably a lot more, but 7 of those areas. And the first area was that having to do with the ground zero evidence that we were talked about in New York, that that's the subject of our grand jury petition there and the lawsuit in Manhattan. So now we're in Washington. So we're saying down in Washington, this was also a mandamus action. It was under the Administrative Procedure Act and the federal mandamus action. And we're saying that the FBI had a responsibility to present this evidence to Congress, and they never did. So that was that evidence had to do, as I said, the controlled demolition evidence. Count 2 had to do with the dancing Israelis supposedly are the high fivers, and count 3 had to do with the destruction of evidence, because the photographs from the Oprah, and I'll go in that for a second, because that's like a sort of a sidebar. The photographs were 76 photographs that New Jersey State Police developed, 8 by 10. And these people were seen, 3 of them, celebrating or filming the event as it was happening early in the morning. So we would think that they would probably have some good video or photos, cameras and videos of what was happening. And they got the term as called high fivers or dancing Israelis, because that's the media spun it that way. You know, I'm not sure if they were dancing or whatever, but the lady said they were celebrating or high fiving each other who called them in. So eventually, going back to the federal lawsuit, not to confuse you, is that all of a sudden we asked the feds for those photos, and they said they may have destroyed them. Well, it's interesting that the fact that they may have destroyed them happens to be around the time when Congress was saying, give us all the evidence. It hadn't been assessed previously. So we threw that in. Count 4 has to do with the Saudi financing. And that's a big lawsuit now. Motley Rice is one of the law firms involved. I believe there's hundreds of co-plaintiffs there. And that's to exact some actually punitive monies from Saudi Arabia and their involvement. There's been these tranches of evidence that have been produced that nobody's seen before. The FBI was sitting on, and I think that's in play. So we sued them on that because they hadn't really updated the public about that, or Congress. Count 5 was cameras in the Pentagon that nobody knew existed. We got through, I guess through a FOIA from somebody else, we got tuned into the fact that these exist, these cameras and the footage. So we would like to see that. Count 6 had to do with plane parts. Now, on plane parts, for those that don't know, there's a lot of controversy reference to what did what. What airplanes hit the towers? Was it actually American 11 hitting the North Tower? Was it actually United 175 hitting the South Tower? Was it actually American 77 hitting the Pentagon? Was it actually United 93 that supposedly crashed or was shot down or did something? Or was it a facsimile thereof, meaning a tanker, a specially equipped airplane? That raises a lot of questions we don't think I have time to go into. But from plane parts, they have serial numbers on. You can tell from certain plane parts what the plane was. So it's pretty easy. You know, it's a signature. So we would like to we thought that the Congress should be updated on that, and that evidence should be presented. The plane parts should be presented with the serial numbers on, right? Makes sense. And the part 7 had to do with the telephone communications, which were initially cell phone communications. And then David Ray Griffin and others has showed that cell phones didn't work back then over 8,000 feet. So how are cell phones making these turns, these calls? So all of a sudden during a Moussaoui trial some years later, the cell phones become air phones and a lot of them disappear and things of that nature. So we wanted that being presented to Congress as how the FBI could flip over a few years where all these cell phone communications now becoming air phones are actually totally disappearing. So that's what's going on in Washington now. The sidebar was, of course, New Jersey, was the Open Public Records Act. And what we did was we sued the state. We didn't want to sue them. We asked them for the photographs. That's what we asked them for. And we asked them, and these are 76 8 by 10 photos, and we know they had them because we had a declassified document from the FBI that indicated they received them from the New Jersey State Police who developed them. So we had the document. And we presented that with our request. And we also had a document showing that there was a request for reports on or in follow-up on a dog, a police dog, tested positive explosives in the van. They took the dog through the van, tested positive for explosives on a fabric and a blanket. So we wanted to have those reports if we could get them.
And for people out there, just so we're clear, because we went over a bunch there, the photos and the van and the dog you're talking about is in regard to the dancing or high-fiving Israelis. This is the...
Right. In New Jersey, across the river, in the area Weehawken, in that area, there was, and there's a company, these guys work for a company called Urban Moving Systems. And Urban Moving Systems may be a front for an intelligence agency, being the Mossad. And it was run by a guy named Dominic Suter. Now, I'm speaking here as I'm right now. Up to now, I've been speaking as the lawyers, the president of the Lawyers Committee. Some of this could be speculative, so I have to speak as myself. We haven't taken a position on this, although we have sued on it. So I guess we have, to some extent, taken a position of who's who and what's what. Apparently, they went back to Israel, and some of them, and they admitted that they were there to document the evidence, document the event. Well, if anyone can document the event, you must have some kind of insider knowledge or some, you must have something, so that certainly law enforcement would be keen to ask you and to query you into what you know and how you came to know it. Not necessarily saying you're involved, but you know something's going on, and we want to follow that up. So anyway, what happened was we sued in New Jersey to get the photos, if they exist. So what they did is their custodial record, he ran around and got 3 certifications that we argued in court were bad because they didn't address where we thought the photos would be, which would be at the forensic photography unit in the Trenton area. And instead they went up North Jersey, and Trenton's in Central Jersey. And that's where the documents said they got the photos from, the forensic photography unit. So you think you would look for that and go in there and find them if they existed. Well, they didn't. All right, they went up North Jersey, gave certifications, and they were contested in court, and the judge agreed. So ordered then enhanced certifications. So with enhanced certifications, they came back and they did a better job looking, or CYA or whatever, and they had a couple more certifications, and they came up with a log entry. Now, which was in the forensic photography unit, a log entry, good. And the log entry said, World Trade Center bombing. So it said bombing. And it said terrorism. And it said confiscated, the film was confiscated. And it had some little initials on it, and it had some, what we later found were FBI initials, pretty sure. And it had a FBI indication that they received at 9/13, or there was something happened at 9/13, which has said, well, this is great because we have a document that basically indicates that they received something from New Jersey State Police on 9/13, and that was 3 sets of 76 photos, 8 by 10. So you're talking about over 200 photos of whatever was being viewed, ever being, that's our understanding. And we wanted those photos, or we wanted an explanation of what happened to those photos, from the statement from the person who did the photography. So what happens is the new custodian record tells the judge that there's initials on there. And she says, and he tells it the initials. So she says, which is what we expected, get a certification from that person. So that person gives a certification, and he says, well, I didn't do the photos. I just did the contact sheets. And furthermore, I don't remember what was on the photos. Furthermore, we gave all the photos back to the FBI, so we don't have any. And so then I had to argue this on the phone with the Attorney General's assistant. And he put a seal on the document, so I couldn't see the document. Only the judge could. So you sort of argue in the dark, but I figured there must be other initials on there. And sure enough, the judge discovers there's other initials on there. And the argument is, well, Judge, that's who we want the certification from, because that apparently is probably the person who did the photos, at least knows if they were done and, who did them, etc. And the judge declined. and the judge ruled against us. So we appealed it. And 3 judges down in Trenton heard it, the argument. And after the argument, the attorney general met me outside, the assistant, and he's shaking his head like, he's disappointed. He shook my hand. He said, I screwed up. I think I screwed up. And he says, I didn't because of one set of the initials. Because the court, and it was really a strong argument, is that this is the person you want the certification from, Your Honor, to help explain this. And really, there's not much we can do. If he says, I did the photos and I gave them all back to the FBI, fine. If he says, I didn't do the photos, fine. Somebody else did it maybe. If he says, yeah, we have a secret file, we put the photos in, we all were looking at the photos because it was the crime of the century. 50 guys came in there, investigators, everybody had it. The colonel took some home for himself. Who knows? But having I have a little background as a police officer for 23 years, so I know that happens. And but the judges ruled. The judge asked the attorney general, "Do you know whose these initials are?" And he said no. And it was like kind of a stunt. Does anyone in the attorney general's office know whose they are? No. It was like nobody asked. I mean, you're going to take this seriously? This is a request. The Open Public Records Act is for the public to get documents that they're entitled to, and we wanted those photos. And do
you think that suggests some higher intelligence level access, or that they're just covering up who it was? And what do you think that suggests?
Well, I'd say there's what we call an adverse inference, and that comes down in the sense of if I ask for example, the first custodian record, I give him a document that shows where the photos may be, if they're going to be anywhere, and he looks everywhere but there. It tells me that the reason he's not looking there is probably he's going to find what I'm asking for. And when the other custodian record comes in and tells the judge there's initials on this document, the log entry, and she says, okay, give me a certification, but doesn't tell the judge that there's other initials on there right next to it that the fellow's working with, that tells me that they don't want a certification from that fellow. And what that's telling me is that's what I want. I want a certification from him. Whatever he says, he says. The question is, why the heck? It's kind of simple. Let the guy just say what happened. But they don't want the fellow to say it. All right, that's what it seems to me. They're purposely not allowing this person to become on the stage. They kept them buried off the stage. They made the document sealed. Now we were able to get the log entry, and because under the common law, you have common law access to documents. Under the Open Public Records Act, they wouldn't give me it. That would change it too. It plays in with attorney's fees and stuff like that, how they give you the document. But what they say is that we didn't even change the direction of the investigation by being persistent. We knocked out the custodian record. He was the regular guy, brought a new guy in. All right, this was the detective sergeant who was in charge. Then they brought a lieutenant in to do the investigation or follow up. But the most disappointment was the 3 judges, though, at the end, is that unanimously they put a sheet over this. They blinded it. And all they had to do was just say, the request was, they asked you, what do you want out of this? I said, we just want a certification from this guy. Identify him and ask him to make a statement as to what he did, reference that film. Whatever he says goes, in a sense. I can't contest it, but I'm thinking maybe he's got some principles. And maybe that's why he's not being asked to do that. He doesn't want to lie under oath, in other words.
Or, I mean, I just might add the possibility that it's just simply someone that they just don't want associated with this entire discussion, right? I mean, there's so many things there that could be. But I mean, I think there's so many things that we probably could have talked about today or continue to talk about here. I'm probably just going to have you back on again in the near future to talk about so many more things as well as where this goes. But I think the real takeaway here that I think people should be easily picking up on is that this is being suppressed in every step of the way. The people that should be, who champion the ideas of freedom and truth around the world are in fact suppressing those very things right in front of us. In fact, suppressing justice for people that they claim they're fighting for in regard to what happened around 9/11. And that's just really despicable to see. So, thanks for coming on today and talking about what we got into. I mean, is there anything else that you wanted to lay out there at the end for people to just, to look into, or any more, big points?
The lawyers committee, we're just interested in the evidence. We're not saying who did what. That's up to the attorney general, not the grand jury. They follow that up. They have much more powers than we have. They can subpoena the U.S. attorney and make deals and things of that nature. We just want to put all the cards on the table. The press hasn't done that. They haven't put the cards on the table. And if anyone wants to, follow up our activities, go to lc4for911.org, and let's do some good things for the United States of America. Thank you.
Couldn't agree more. And I'll be sure to include all the stuff we talked about and all your social media links and everything else, websites, and in the show notes for everyone to check out. And I really hope people will take the time to dive in further, because as I said, there's so many things around this that we just don't have time to get into. So I hope you will continue to research and just recognize what we're talking about here today has ties with everything else going on, from the past to currently what's happening around us, the suppression of the truth, and we need to stand up for it. Thank you for being here, David. I appreciate your time. And everyone out there, as always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Thank you. Take care.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago, I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. It seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city, but completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them today.
Presumably there were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of possible further collapses around the area.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it.
Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it.
Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.